Okay. Hello, everybody. So we're going to start. I'm going to MC today. I'm Lucie Lalumière. I'm the acting president and CEO of Interactive Ontario. So this is the third session of a very interesting series, if you've been participating. And we're co-presenting with the Cultural Human Resources Council. First thing I want to say is a big thank you to the Canada Council for the Art, because without their support, this wouldn't be possible. As you may already know, they have the Digital Strategy Fund. So if you are an artist or an arts organization and want to do something with digital technology, there's a deadline coming this fall, so you should really look at their website. I also want to thank our venue partner, the Toronto Media Arts Centre. This is fantastic. It's my first time here, so it's a great space for that kind of session. So, you know, the goal of these sessions are not only skill transfer, but also connections and also inspiration. So the first thing we're going to have is one presentation by Ian. I'm going to introduce you shortly. Then lunch, and I don't know if you've seen over there, there's a VR setup. Apparently it's an awesome experience, so you'll be able to try that. And then we're going to have another presentation after lunch. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ian Kelso. Ian is the co-founder of Impossible Things, and they do fantastic AR applications in museum. I've experienced ReBlink at the AGO. It really enhanced my experience there. So welcome, Ian, to you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Wow, it's amazing. It's great to be here. And thank you all for coming out on such a warm, sunny Thursday morning. And hello to the millions of people out there in streaming video land. I'm sure there's many of you out there. Thanks. It's great that Interactive Ontario is running a series like this about arts in the future, and it's a great time, I think, for Interactive Ontario. As you know, their CEO, Krista Dickinson, former CEO, Krista Dickinson, was just appointed to run Telefilm Canada. So we're taking over, us digital people, so it's about time. So what I'm hoping to do, I'm going to try to dive right in, because I've got a lot of material to cover and a short time, and I've been told that I'll be cut off if I go over. So, so I've got to be disciplined today. So what I hope to do is just share with you a little bit of our experience working in augmented reality. We've only done it for a relatively short time because, hey, it's only been around a relatively short period of time. So it's awesome working in sort of a bleeding edge technology most of the time, but sometimes you wish somebody made a handbook and you could just sometimes look up and say, what should I do now? So I'll first sort of take you through the first big project that we took on as a company, and then from that, hopefully try to give you some lessons learned from that, but also try to apply it to what we thought were the implications for how stories are changing and how augmented reality can help in that transformation, and it can add a whole new layer of value in terms of the ability to tell stories and do it in a different way. So Impossible Things, really started around our first project. It's a very small company. We're 5 people based in downtown Toronto. And with new technologies, we sort of have new vernacular, sort of a new nomenclature that comes up, and it's kind of an opportunity because you get to define what you call things, but at the same point, you sort of get a lot of tags that people use that are not commonly understood. So I first gonna try not to pay any disrespect to the name of the series, but immersive is a word that's been used over and over again for VR and AR type technologies. I'm going to take a little bit of an issue with that from the start, just in a very friendly way. How many people here work in AR and VR. Okay. So I'm speaking to a lot of the converted. So, many of you probably know what's called Milgram's continuum, or the virtuality continuum, and it goes from, virtual reality to, what we call RR, real reality. And in between those two things, the overlay of, virtual things into the physical world, you have sort of what some call augmented reality, some call mixed reality, and then that whole thing is sometimes referred to as XR, extended reality. I'm going to use augmented reality to kind of mean all that stuff in between, because we don't have a fixed idea of what those things are. And so I'm just going to encourage you to, not pay too much attention to labels and just pay attention to, the media and what its capabilities are. So we know that, basically on the one end, with virtual reality, it is a truly immersive experience. You get the opportunity to create and control, what the environment is that the user, is navigating. Whereas in augmented reality, you have to pay attention to and you have to deal with the physical world, the ever-changing physical world, depending on, location, where you are, and what's happening. So in the context of this talk, I'm going to touch on a little bit of sort of the history and where this fits in context. And it's great, when we come up with new technologies, and I've been sort of, in my long career, I know I don't look that old, but I am. I've been fortunate to sort of be at the, sort of at the crest or be behind maybe some of the waves of new technologies. And, it's interesting to see how they at first get adopted and used, and then how, 5 years later you go, oh my God, what was I thinking? And so, we're in the constant process of building our tools and then really trying to figure out what those tools actually do. It's kind of like making a hammer and going, okay, what does this do well? Okay. So sometimes the technology tends to get ahead and you're just kind of, you're using old ideas to, try to use that tool at first, and it's natural. And the other neat thing is when we're making tools is we create new ways of telling stories, and sometimes those new stories then turn around and give us ideas about new tools that we can make. So, I mean, Star Trek is probably the most, obvious example of that, and sort of all the technologies that were created in people's imaginations that became real. So off the top, I think it's really important to look at the tools in augmented reality and, virtual reality to a very similar degree in that, this could only exist right now. This platform, this medium, could only really exist at this point in time because of the convergence of all the different technologies that go into it and how they've matured. So, you've got a whole host of very sophisticated technology that's working in tandem. And so it's new, and it's new for a reason, because we've just finally reached the point at which we can actually accomplish many of the capabilities of AR technologically. And like I said, we tend to approach new technologies with old assumptions. So it's just like don't make assumptions about the movie based on the book. Let's not make assumptions about what actually constitutes a story in AR until we discover how the tools can help us create stories in AR. So I'll call it, instead of immersive experiences, let's call what we do sort of subversive experiences, because AR plays with the world around us and it changes the world and it changes it into something new, and that's the big opportunity, is to sort of be able to manipulate and subvert the world around. And to sort of finish off that, my sort of introduction, I'll be folly then not to take the opportunity to talk about a quote from Marshall McLuhan, our great media theorist, who thought it was critical to look at content and context together. And I'll talk a little bit about content later on and context. But I love this quote, and we tend to first look at what changes in new technology is, what the content of the change is, and not the framework of that content. So in talking a little bit now about the art of AR, sorry, I'm just catching up here. Okay. So the first thing we have to ask is, can everybody sort of see that slide? It's a little bit murky, but what are those things in that picture? So that's the question that we first asked ourselves is, what are those things hanging on the wall? And what do they mean to people? And that sort of raises the question, what value do those things have? So, obviously they're paintings. They're hanging in a gallery. But most of us really don't know what the value of those paintings really are. Most of us haven't studied art history. We don't know what era they're from. We don't know why they're important. They're just in an art gallery. They're in a museum. They must be important because, somebody put them there. They're in a very hallowed place. But it's kind of intimidating because you kind of go in and you look and you say, well, yeah, okay, I recognize, that one. I've seen that one before. Okay, I know that's valuable. I don't know too much about, Da Vinci, but he was a smart guy and he was really creative, and this thing's worth $620 million. So obviously it's got value. So it's probably worth recording it, and people like to be associated with things of value. So maybe take a selfie with it. But one thing that's been remarkable is that the time that people are spending actually looking at art in museums has been decreasing. Over the past few decades, it's come down to, this research is actually old now, but 17 seconds was the average gaze time at a piece of art it was a study at the Met in New York, when people actually stopped to look at paintings, which is few and far between. And of course, you can imagine that it is getting shorter because we deal with images in a completely different way than we did 5, 10, and 20 years ago. We have images everywhere now. We spend our day sorting through images. Our feeds, are just replete with, image after image that we've got to sort and rate and like. And so, what we're doing is we're constantly just looking for relevance. We're just sorting through, visually and trying to find out, how do I, understand this image and what it means to me, and what do I need to do to respond or signify something about that image. So it sets our brains up to be very analytical about those images. And so for museums, that's a problem. And so, obviously museums are in a danger of losing engagement. Now, this isn't what you think, actually. Because, you're probably looking at this and you're thinking, okay, bunch of kids in a museum, Snapchat, they're texting each other, they're communicating back and forth, but they're not. And this is another problem for museums, is that they're actually using the Rijksmuseum. This is the Night Watch by Rembrandt. I didn't actually even know that a couple years ago. This is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and this is the kids are actually using the app in the museum. And so the problem here is not actually that they're not paying attention to the painting. They are paying attention to the content of the artwork that's in the museum, but they're looking down. They're not looking at the artwork. They're looking on their phones. And so they're being taken away from the actual core experience. So there's two sides of a problem. So when my business partner, Alex Mayhew, who emigrated here to Canada about 8 or 9 years ago, called me up in late 2015 around Christmas time. I got this call and said, I'm doing this project with the Art Gallery of Ontario. I've got a commission and I need to raise some more money. Will you come and help me? I heard you've done business stuff before. And you get labeled that way in the industry. I'm doing augmented reality, and I've got, I think, this really interesting approach to augmented reality that can get people to engage with artwork in a different way. Will you come and help me create a business plan and do a presentation to an innovation fund? And so, I said, oh, it sounds pretty cool. And then I looked at what he was doing, and I looked at, his past. He'd worked with Peter Gabriel at Real World Studios, and he created projects there, one of which won a couple of BAFTA awards, which is the sort of Academy Awards in the UK. And it starred Isabella Rossellini and Ben Kingsley. It was called Ceremony of Innocence. He'd also worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company and MIT, and sort of a host of really interesting, both sort of commercial and artistic projects that some of which were highly innovative and experimental. I just said, hell yeah. And he'd done a project when he first came to Canada called Time Tremors, which was an idea I had for a cross-platform, sort of multi-platform series. It was a TV series, and it was a series of games and apps. And that was produced by Xenophile Media here in Toronto. And as part of that, he'd done a scavenger hunt. And he used early augmented reality to just hide objects in paintings, and kids had to go and find those objects and then answer a question about the painting, which was kind of the brilliant part of it, to prove that they were actually looking at the content of the painting and not just looking for the object in the painting. And so he did that, and that scavenger hunt, one of them took place at the AGO. And so he formed a relationship there and introduced them to early augmented reality. And they were very excited about how psyched kids got about doing that experience. It kind of flipped over one of the problems they had with families was that parents would bring their kids, and the kids would be there 20 minutes and going, "Mommy, Daddy, can we please go home now?" And playing the game, it was the opposite. The parents were going, "Okay, we've been here for 2 hours. We really have to go. We really have to go." So that was a great problem for the AGO to have. So when Alex sort of finished that series, he used to sit in the AGO, and he used to sit in front of this particular painting, which is a Canadian painting called Drawing Lots. It's George Agnew Reid. See, I'm becoming an art expert. I actually have a BFA, but I didn't do well in art history, though. George Agnew Reid, a Toronto artist from the turn of the previous century, and he just looked at this painting and thought, wow, life was so different back then here in Toronto. And he kind of, had been through this arduous process, and he was just tired of all the electronic communication, everybody finding him and having to respond to things every second of the day. And he just thought, oh, what was it like back then? I would love to be able to kind of get an image of what it was like back then, and kind of compare it to how things have changed, and kind of wondered, what would this scene look like today? And this was kind of the genesis of ReBlink. And so he thought, what if paintings could come to life and we could look at them through that modern day lens? And the more he thought about it, the more he looked at different paintings, he thought, this could be a really interesting way to just engage people. They would see something that would kind of recontextualize the experience. It would give them something familiar that they could latch onto. They'd say, okay, I know what I know what that is. And it kind of used the tools of distraction, to become tools of engagement. And so he put together a plan for the exhibition, and like I said, he sold it to the AGO. When I saw he did a demo, when I saw that and I saw where the technology was at, it just blew me away. And so I came in, we made the pitch, short story, we got the money, and we went, okay, shit, now we got to do it. So in mid-2016, we put a team together in partnership with the Ontario College of Art, or OCAD University, and we got to work. And we picked 10 paintings, and we went about creating what we call remixes. And a remix, is really kind of what it sounds like in a way. It's like a DJ remixes a song, it takes a source material and it applies sort of a different rhythm, a different beat, some different melodies, and it just presents it in a new way, and one that syncs up with the sensibilities of its audience. And we did that just using mobile devices. We decided to just stick with using tablets and smartphones and not go to the headset because everybody has one in their pocket. And so we launched the show July of last year. And so I'll give you a little bit of a video overview of the show, just because has anybody else actually seen the show at the AGO? Okay, there's a few. Awesome. Cool. And this will give you a little bit of a sense of what the result of that was.
We have a suspicious person. Over.
This is really cool.
They're getting closer. Over.
Thank you. So the show originally was slated to run from July to December, and I don't think the AGO didn't really know what to make of it at first. The person who commissioned it and championed it, obviously, I think, she really went to bat for us, and she was very, very convinced of this being something that would be important for them to pursue, and that it would really, help to accomplish a number of different objectives in the museum. One of them is engagement. Her particular discipline was from the Interpretation and Education Department, so it would help people to learn something new and learn something differently about the paintings. But I don't think what they didn't anticipate was just sort of, what an immediate effect it would have, not just on the people looking at it, but, and we didn't expect it at all either, is that, it kind of took off in terms of, people seeing this as a way of using augmented reality, to do something that was kind of, fun and magical, and, maybe in some ways obvious. I mean, if you watched Harry Potter, bringing paintings to life is kind of, one thing that you're a little bit familiar with. But I think what was really important about what we did with each of the paintings in the context of this show was that, we treated it as an artistic endeavor sort of the layer of the experience that we got commissioned as artists, or Alex was commissioned as an artist to bring, his perspective. So we were actually focusing on saying something and doing something that moved people or transformed the way people thought. And so each painting had specific meaning and purpose in terms of what we were trying to communicate. And it wasn't just about, hey, let's make this look cool. Hey, look what we can do. So there was a long process, and some of it may be successful and some of it not so successful, at trying to create this sort of synthetic medium experience that actually spoke something to people who were looking at it. And so what it ended up doing, I think, and in the end, in terms of how it shifted people's perspective, I think the value that it really accomplished at the end of the day, though, is by using that modern day story and recontextualizing it, it opened up the way people were looking at the original material. It switched a channel, it switched a filter in people's minds. And I think that was sort of first sort of illustrated to us. We first kind of realized that after Alex was interviewed by Tom Power on Q on CBC, and Tom said, you know what, every time I go to the AGO with my friends, I sit outside because I don't like going in there, because I feel really intimidated, because I don't know anything about art history. My friends are, they're all pretty savvy, and so I just kind of feel like, I feel bad. But in the process of researching the show, he'd gone into the AGO to see the ReBlink exhibition, and he said, when it was weird, something happened, something clicked in my mind when I was in there, and I was looking at the experience, and suddenly I was looking at the paint, and I saw them just really as stories. The original paintings were just, ideas that people were trying to express, or feelings that people were trying to put out there. And then I started looking at all the other pieces in the same way, and not thinking of them analytically, thinking about them as impressions, as ideas and stories. So I think, if I could identify one thing creatively in terms of the value and what's really happening when in this remix experience, it's that shift in context creates a shift in the way you're seeing and the lens that you put on what you're seeing. Okay, so I'm going to try to pick up the pace and run through. We had 22,000 downloads and 200,000 activations of individual paintings. The show is extended until April of this year, and still part of the show is still up. So if you haven't seen it yet, there's still 4 paintings up at the AGO that are ReBlink enabled, and we're talking about coming back and doing sort of a refresh show maybe in the next several months. There was over 200 international stories written about ReBlink, and the video that we put online got picked up, and at least 2 million views of it across different channels. And then we had radio and television, and we've been invited around the world, and we've done pop-up exhibitions using posters, reproductions. And and the neat thing is, everywhere you go, you just have to stand in the gallery, and the true test of whether your product is working or not, you can usually see it in the people's faces that are using it. You just sort of look at their face and their eyes, and when they start to use it, you can see what's going on there, and it's fun to see when people are using ReBlink, their faces kind of like light up. There's this visceral response, and so it's just it's also got that sort of sense of mystery and the sense of trying to uncover something new and wondering what's in there, and there's a sense of surprise. So as far as exceeded our expectations, we had some sort of celebrity tours, which was kind of fun. We went to a lot of conferences and festivals. Really cool, we got nominated for a Webby Award, and we're up against IKEA and Snapchat, a couple of little companies you might have heard of, and none of us won. So, it was a little company from Estonia called Sketchar that won. But we did win a Museum Technology Award from the American Alliance of Museums, which is the big association of museums across North America, for best AR, VR, or game. So we were quite proud of that. So let me talk a little bit about sort of AR and story. Where I come from, I've been around. I started here, 1993, 94, in the early internet, and things were pretty different back then. Am I catching up? Sorry. So we had 14.4 modems, which are 35,000 times slower than the average connection today. Like I said, I have a BFA. My background is in multidisciplinary. I did filmmaking, did live theater, creative writing, music. And at the time, I rejected computers. I liked using, the mechanical technologies, the physical technologies. I kind of thought of art and technology as almost opposite ends of the spectrum. It was kind of, and I had a bit of an epiphany. I moved to Greece for a year, and in doing so, beforehand I learned some Greek, useful, and I discovered this word, which is the word techne, and techne is the Greek word for art, but it's also, of course, the root word of technology. So I started to think about, how is this? I thought they were, different things. So I started thinking about art as technology in terms of thinking about it as, what it's actually doing, what is its, usefulness, why do we create stories, and, there's a simple reason practical reason for making stories, because it helps us to, preserve information and ideas and values and things like that that are important to our species and be able to make it travel over distance and time. So, there's this practical purpose to us being able to pass information along. Of course, technology is changing exponentially. Not just the modem speed, but processor speed, bandwidth, everything. It started me thinking about all these things coming together. That there may be something a lot bigger going on. As we sort of look at how things are changing and where they're going, and what 3D can potentially do to shift the whole paradigm of storytelling. Content is a word that people have used for a long, long time to describe the sort of the central experience of using an art, it's sort of being a battle. Content is king is something that's been sort of bandied about for last at least 20 years, at least in my career. It's sort of the fight to preserve content. But to me, content has always been kind of what is contained. It's what's inside the box, and that's not kind of what we do. I think more we're experience creators, and so I think that fundamental idea is now, before where it might have been sort of precious to me to say, no, we're not making content, we're making experiences. That what we're doing now, I think does. Nomenclature is important to think about, the way we call things, and that because there's, I think, fundamental shift about the ideas of content and experience are integral to what we're doing in augmented reality and in extended reality. And so, I said the king is dead, and I'll quickly sort of run through some thoughts that sort of came to my head about how this fits into sort of a broad historical perspective about stories and how we've used stories over time and how we've told stories over time, and where AR and VR fit is in the evolution of communications. I think we kind of started here 300,000 years ago, and it was 3D. It was live 3D. We got around and we actually physically performed. It was the oral culture. And and there's something about that oral culture that is magical, and that is visceral. It can be very spiritual. There's a kind of energy you get if you've ever been an actor on a stage in theater, or if you've ever been in a great performance in theater or live music. That it can transport you in a way that's almost impossible in screened entertainment. But there's a problem with this kind of culture, is that when you're trying to preserve and pass along information, it's hard to keep that information straight over time. It doesn't travel very well. So, the 2.0 era, say, is like the invention of 2D media, and that's like 30,000 years ago. And so, first, making pictures, and, later on, creating a language, and that created this great replication and portability to, we could encode these things and then send them off. And there were 3D media then too, but they weren't very portable. So, and then to make a big leap forward to, say, sort of era 2.9, and the information age, and especially the internet age, it just sort of magnified that reach and speed of information to the nth degree. Sort of fastest light delivery. But there's been a problem that I've seen with language. And again, it's sort of another thing that we become kind of precious about. It's like, we're at risk of losing touch with literature and the written word and reading, and people don't do enough reading. But I kind of think of, looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, reading is hard, and it's hard on your brain. And when you look at like a 10-letter word, like impossible, and you look at that as code, if you want to sort of think technologically and say, all this language stuff is really, we're encoding things that can be decoded later. And so I look at a 10-letter word, like impossible, and I look at the impossible number of permutations and combinations in that 10-letter word. It's 141 trillion. So, the decoding process of 26 letters times, 10 letters sequence, can be very taxing. And so a lot of, there's several neuroscientists that, are, making claims, the brain is not evolved for reading and writing. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we should be open to the fact that that might be okay. So, just a suggestion. As I said before, 2D screens are now proliferated. They're everywhere, and they, put images in front of us everywhere, and it's really commodified. When you think of like the era that those older paintings were painted in, images were very rare. To see an image of a thing or a person or a place, you rarely saw one of those things. So when you did, you're just like, oh, wow, holy, And now it's just like, whatever. And so the new era, well, I'll call it, the 3.0 era, which has been, let's say, because I've been using, the 3-factor, within the last 3 years, we kind of come of age. And I'm going to say that this is sort of maybe the post-literate era of sort of true 3D or the next-gen 3D. And it's got some of the similar characteristics to that original era. The oral tradition, the live storytelling tradition, but it also incorporates all of the advantages and technologies, or many of them from the interim 2D period. So it combines sort of the live and the visceral and the immediate nature of storytelling that our brains have adapted to over hundreds of thousands of years, with the sort of effective speed and reach and permanence of electronic media. So. You can think of, you want to think of the screen analogy, then you just think, our world has become a screen. There's no longer, 2D things that you carry around in your pocket or you see on a wall, but, everything around you has become that medium for potential storytelling and information exchange. And, AR, first was very informational, but, as we've tried to bring more mature ways of transferring and that, ideas and impressions and values. We've approached it with much more sophisticated material, and so what we haven't yet, I think, made is the shift that we're not dealing with the content anymore of those stories, but it's really the context. Now, if you look at what's been actually successful so far in augmented reality, and this is very early, and it's arguably not even, it's not even really augmented reality, but it uses a lot of the strengths, some of the strengths of augmented reality, is that Pokemon Go is really about the context. It's really about the location. And it took advantage of that, and that made it, really hugely valuable and fun. It did something different. And the same with something like the IKEA app, is it really is strictly focused on the context of the experience. It's, being able to do something in a context you couldn't do before. So sometimes with IKEA it's useful, and sometimes, the content, the experience is more meaningful. But I think ReBlink worked because we try to, we've sort of identified a number of strengths in augmented reality that we tried to, iterate and build to. And so quickly, these are, I guess, the things that we discovered are really meaningful to focus on. So number one is it's an audio-visual medium. It's not alphanumeric. So text on the screen, although it does work occasionally, is not a very compelling thing. To put up 2D media into a 3D environment, or to create an experience where you have to read, really interrupts the whole flow of an experience in augmented reality. Contextual, as I said, it's got to be addressing the context and the circumstance. That it's dynamic, that allows exploration, that it can adapt to the user's perspective. Just like in the live, around the campfire, you can see if people are responding to the story you're telling, and you can involve them in the story. It's important to be dynamic. That it's sensual. It's not just a visual medium. We use a lot of audio. We use audio in every piece, but we paid a lot of attention to what that audio was. And if we could have gone into tactile, or we could have gone into smell, or gone into using the maximum number of senses, then that's something to be aware of, or something to consider. That it's procedural, so you have the advantage of being able to drive experiences by algorithm, and so they aren't just looped animations. They can be, they are something that seems to come to life and live and be different and be reactive. The magical element to it is, about the flow of the experience. When you're seeing something, when a painting comes to life, I think you have a different kind of reaction to things in 3D that come to life at a very deep primitive level. I think when something comes to life in 3D, your brain pays a different kind of attention to it. It treats it as real. And so you focus on a different way. It's almost, sort of a fight or flight. It's like a predator. Oh, okay, something. So I think your brain is just reacting to it in a very specific way. And if that thing sort of stays animated and alive, you entertain it and you let it exist. If you interrupt that experience with something that, breaks that, then, immediately it all goes away. So the sense of magic is about, how the transitions happen and how the thing actually persists, is really important, that you keep an uninterrupted flow of experience. And then presence, and that sort of it's, some of a similar thing, is recognizing that you're creating things that apparently inhabit the same space as you, and that they can take on empathic, sort of emotional relationships. Because of that kind of attention you're paying to it, you become, I think, open to treating it in a different way. You kind of look to it, and you try to anthropomorphize it. You try to sort of, form a relationship with it. And these are just things that are, I think, going on sort of at a, deeper, sort of primitive psychological level. So, have we got a couple more minutes? 2 minutes? Okay. I'm almost there. So if I could sort of wrap things up to say that, true 3D, native 3D, I haven't even settled on a name of what I want to call it, but this sort of 3.0 era of 3D, it's content, not context, it's experience. And ReBlink was, I think, successful in part, at least, in that it, strove to discover those things that were meaningful, and that it used an approach that tried to create a new kind of meaning for people, to give them a new context, and let's see. What's next? I think there's huge opportunities to take art out of the museums, Let's see if we can do a quick. But if I could just end on this, if this would actually. Oh, there we go. Playing. It's not playing on my screen. So here we can blend, in a way, augmented virtual reality and create windows into new kind of environments that are maybe there is something that's immersive AR, and gives you that kind of access to port yourself into different places in space and time, and sort of bring creatures and places from sort of parallel dimensions, alternate dimensions, into our own reality for maybe just a brief period of time, and allow for us to interact with it. It's kind of it gives you the ability to make your imagination actually real, and so don't try to approach it not thinking about the history of what you know and the language and the vernacular, the grammar of the different backgrounds you come from, like I did. Don't think of art and technology as these two separate things, but play with it and experiment with it, and try to keep teasing out what those superpowers are, what those capabilities are of the platform. We're just at the very, very beginning of this phase, really, really early days. Which is a huge amount of fun, and and soon I think maybe less scary, because people will start actually buying more AR like they are VR. So, thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Interact Ontario.
So I'm sure you have tons of questions for Ian. So those of you who are here, Ian, you're staying over lunch until the end. And we are being streamed on Facebook and YouTube on the Interactive Ontario channels. So we have to be back here at 12:45. Lunch will be over there. And hi, we have an awesome VR experience for you to experience over the next 45 minutes. So let's be back at 12:45. Thank you again.